introduce today's topic. So today's topic is Pathways to Redemption, Navigating Recovery and Justice. And today we're doing that with Mateo. That is
jazz
what
hands.
it is jazz hands. Da, 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 recovery justice. Recovery justice. What?
That's a new TV show.
Recovery and justice. It's like the gay version of CSI.
Oh my God.
Or cops. But yeah, so we're talking. So this month is dedicated to Pathways to Redemption and Navigating Recovery and Justice. And today we're doing that with Mateo. We'll be doing that for the rest of the month. We have two other guests that we're going to be meeting this month. Before we jump in, there are a couple things I wanted to share. So for those familiar with our programming, we'll be off for the month of May. We use a quota system. We'll be off for the month of May, and then we'll be back June 5th, which is a Wednesday. So we're moving our time slot. We're moving to Wednesdays, and we're going to be filming later in the evening. So it'll be at 8 p.m. So our new time slot is going to be Wednesdays at 8 p.m. We'll be doing that come June 5th. What did Kevin just say?
He said sober wonder twin powers activate.
With sober wonder twins powers activate. Are you coming down? Wait.
No,
what does that mean?
That's a show. That's a TV show.
It's like none of those words make sense together.
They make sense.
Yeah, they make sense to someone. To me, they do. So Mateo, we ask all of our guests the same three questions. Okay. The first question I have for you. So 3 questions within 3 minutes.
Okay.
First question is, I've never used so many hand gestures while we were
I was thinking about 3 minutes and how questions. I think Vogue does that thing where 73 questions and they have to follow the person walking around.
That's one of my
That's how we should do it. Totally film it beforehand. So you ask the 3 questions where you're posing and everything. Go ahead.
Right.
Well, I'm impressed that we're getting to the 3 questions before the 10-minute mark, because sometimes we forget the time. So the first question is, where are you from?
Born in Napa, off and on between Napa, St. Helena, Modesto, Merced.
Okay.
From K through 12.
How did you get to San Francisco?
This is all buzz.
Damn, girl, I had 3 minutes. So, you ready for a story?
Right. No, in Napa, there's a cutoff for age for any resources that is for LGBTQ.
Okay.
And so along that, with burning a lot of bridges in my addiction, my homelessness was just getting a lot more intense, where fentanyl was being presented, people were dying around me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a friend out here who was the only friend that was normal that would talk to me. And I wanted to at least spend time with somebody that wasn't in active addiction. So I would ferry over here. And then I stayed homeless for 6 months out here.
So how old were you when you moved here? Was this recent? Was it last
October 1st of 2022?
Oh, word. Of 2022.
Yeah.
Louis, you knew that?
I
I
remember her coming up. So, this is a nice little segue into the next question.
Yes.
What made you get sober? Because I know that you came over to be around people who weren't, but what made you decide to kind of take the plunge? Not to trigger anybody who takes the plunge.
Why take the plunge? Anyway, go ahead. Go back to the question. Sorry.
Terminology.
Yeah.
I didn't want to at first. I only wanted to find a safe place to drink and use. And I was like, I'm going to manipulate. I'm going to lie. I'm going to find a way to work the systems. And I didn't care what kind of bridges I would burn along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen. My psychosis, my delusion carried over heavier than I thought. And I went to rehab, and that was 2 weeks. I was heavily, my thing was, I'm going to get my way. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't work. And for about 2 weeks, I argued and I fought tooth and nail about it's my way and that's it. I found a place that was going to allow me to drink and use based off other people's experience there. But when after signing my lease and coming back to the rehab, I talked to my friend Noah, who is my very, very good friend. He's shown up many times when I was suicidal. But I said, I don't know what this feeling is, but it doesn't feel right that I know what I'm about to do. And so I started to realize that's introspection. That was the first time I ever learned that word. Got back to the rehab, and the director and my case manager, I sat down with them and I said, look, I've been lying. I don't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel right. And I want to stay. And I didn't move forward, and I ended up staying for 90 days after signing that contract. And it was intense because they both shook my hand and they were like, "It's so nice to finally start to get to know you." And I was like, "What is that?" Yeah.
So then, the last question,
Yeah.
which is, what is your relationship with your higher power? Do you have a relationship with a higher power?
I do. I do believe in God.
Okay.
I started off going to like Pentecostal church. I've been baptized twice in a Baptist church. I was in a choir.
Did you say in a choir or you were acquired?
Church. No, in a choir.
You were. I was like, who acquired you?
No,
Okay.
I used to sing in a choir and travel for singing. But I was always drunk.
In the choir?
In the choir, yeah.
Girl, drunk while she was acquired.
I would hide bottles in my little bag.
We do what we have to.
Yeah, but where it's at now is my God still exists. It's not as religious aspects from like a Bible, but it's more spiritual. It's more what is around me. How does my environment influence what's happening within me? And I don't know how to explain it, and that's okay.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
I think Lewis probably said this, or Lewis was repeating someone else that said, if you can explain your God, it isn't big enough. Was that you, Lewis?
Well, you're right. Both places. I said it, but I also know that I got it from somewhere.
It's okay. And they probably got it from somewhere. And
I usually modify them all. It's like if the issues that you have going on or whatever are too big for your higher power, then your higher power is not big enough.
Oh, I like that.
That's right.
I like that. My first sponsor in San Francisco had told me like 10 things that are like, I forget what the category of like how to list it, but one was like, what goes up must come down. Things that are just like actual bigger than me, and I realized that's a version of like how higher power.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So let us jump into today's discussion. So we are talking about, like I said, pathways to recovery, navigating recovery in the justice system. And so I know, like in my own experience, that, for example, I grew up and a lot of the men I've shared this during the last episode, a lot of the men in my family have done time. There are felony convictions. My father didn't get out of prison until I was in my 20s. And so growing up, I saw a lot of behaviors and stuff like that. So can you tell us a little bit about what like early childhood was like for you?
Yeah. So by 5 years old, the person who was molesting me got away with a lot of things at the denial of my dad's side of the family, saying like, this is not true. So my experience with that later on was when he was finally held accountable and went to jail. In that 7 years from 5 to 12, my father kept getting DUIs and doing illegal things that he was being arrested for, going to prison. So I know what it's like to visit prison in that short time. Outside of that, like my mother's side of the family, not much. My dad's side of the family it was pretty heavy.
So you were like exposed to criminal behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then when would you say that behavior or any, like, when would you, I guess the question is, did that influence you at all in like the decisions you made later on, or?
Yeah, 100%. So it has a big part of my life because my father raped my best friend at that time when I was 13, going from freshman to sophomore year. And I didn't know where my father was, other than just like he would go do welding jobs for 2 weeks and then come back home, sometimes 3 weeks. Well, he never showed up. And in that summer, I found out that he fled the country.
Oh, wow.
And so where that sits with me today is like, for many years, from 13 to where I'm at now at 34, is I don't want to follow in that footsteps. I would rather take responsibility and just be a different, better person and not spread that. For me, I don't want to just mimic my father because he's still in his active addictions. And it's that abandonment affects not only himself, but it affected me, and I'm his child.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So yeah, that's
yeah. So that's what, so when you look back, you like, there are very kind of like specific things that you can point to
for where I'm at today. Yes. Just because I have legal amends that I'm working on, but where it started to affect me was like the first time I got arrested, at 18, my first DUI. Second DUI, it was Adele's newest album, Set Fire to the Rain, was playing, and I was going like 65 in,
She's so
in a
dramatic.
student. I was. The window was down. Fire to the rain. I remember getting off of 29 and like sparking my DeJarme cigarette after like 6 wineries.
Not a DeJarme.
Yeah, and they pulled
like
me
a honey
over.
DeJarme cigarette?
Yeah, I think it's for. I don't.
No, I know they're cloves, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I used to fuck with cloves.
I still have those.
They taste like ham.
They smell and taste delicious.
Yeah, like cloves.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far off. Finish your thought.
Oh yeah. So that was my second time. Each time I had to do time for each DUI. Third time I got arrested, I called the cops on myself, and I don't remember what happened.
Okay.
And then my first felony.
You said each time you had to do time? Like, how much?
The first time I did, I think it was 45 days, but I got half. Second time, the first time I got half, but I was let out early on house arrest because the individual that was working as a CO in Napa jail had kept saying in Spanish, "Te voy a raptar," and I don't know what that meant, but I thought he was talking about like Jurassic Park. I'm like, oh, raptors. But someone else had overheard that what he was saying, and me not knowing until I found out, he was telling me he was going to rape me. So the individual that heard it told me, you should probably say something. And then my distrust in the system was that the person that I had told, who was running that specific kitchen, wasn't going to do anything. And so I tried to mention it to someone else. They did like an interrogation for 4 hours, replayed the audio, and then they put me out on house arrest.
Were you underage at the time?
18.
18. Okay,
yeah. This is it's striking me how much like a lot of sexual assault is in the history, and another way of kind of like talking about sexual assault is to talk about like trauma. So would you say, like, go ahead, what were you going to say?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that, like, one is like, I'm absolutely sorry to hear this, and I'm wondering, like, trauma with a capital T, how much of that do you think has also influenced like the trajectory of your life?
Oh, in many ways. I can be specific. 2 different ways. Growing up, I was such a big liar that no one would believe me. I was like the boy that cried wolf. And so when my family found out that I was being let out on house arrest, I was being treated as if I was lying, manipulating. And in that time, I was actually telling the truth. And that was like PTSD on one level. But going back, another way that it affected me was then anytime I would go to jail after that, I wouldn't be allowed to serve in the kitchen. They would put me in protective custody, and I was in there with like murderers and like child molesters. And then I would be sexual. I just didn't feel comfortable.
Right.
And I would mention it, but then you don't want to be the snitch.
Of course.
And so that gets more isolating.
That was something else. It's like my experience with going into a jail or whatever after I turned myself in for DUI, something that stood out is they transferred me to this place called Elmwood. And once I wasn't willing to tell them that I was gay, but once they came to me out casually and said, you want to tell us something? And then they put us in an area that they called a camp or whatever, but it was gay men and child molesters. And I brought that. But I wanted to ask you a question. Okay, so when you were arrested those times for DUI, did you have access to a lawyer, or was it that they gave you a public defendant? Or
I got a public defender.
So basically, in my mind, it's like they kind of let you down, huh?
I didn't even know what my rights were, and I asked many times, even after the first time I got arrested and let out on house arrest. I was like, why'd you wait so long? I'm like, well, I don't know what my rights are as a person in jail.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, you have very few. I mean, you have rights, but they're like you're stripped of a lot of rights when you're in jail.
That's nice.
Yeah. I want to go back to, like, you talked about like your first DUI. Like when you think about your first DUI, like what were the things that kind of like led up to that, right? So like, did your drinking or like your using start to increase? Or
by then I was blacking out by 8. First drink was at 5. I was using speed by the time I was in 8th grade. Come 13th high school, I was a chameleon, and I knew that I wanted to come out, be enjoyous of my being gay. But what was being projected online was a lot of opposite of what my authentic self was.
When you say online, do you mean like social media?
Yeah, social media. And
okay.
so I was always just like flamboyant, extra. I wore track suits with like Uggs. And anyways,
you did, Jennifer Lopez.
I did. And I, you know,
like the juicy, like
I was like a delusional Lauren Conrad sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah, by the time I got arrested, my addiction was I had lost a lot of friendships, and I was okay with that at that time because it just was normal. And so I was alone and I was drinking with my mother, and there was a lot of people partying. And this was something that's really common with both sides of my families. Like alcohol was always prevalent, but that wasn't enough for me. So I started using Coke. I would smoke weed. I would ecstasy, and then I would do all of them at one time. So by the time I got arrested, I was already making an embarrassment of myself post high school into my first DUI, which was like I think like a week after I graduated high school.
Okay. Yeah. And you talked about like numerous DUIs. So at what point do you feel like things started to like escalate quickly, and what did escalation look like for you?
Oh, well, when consequences were more personal for me was when my family started making it
hold on one second.
Yeah. Mateo from the block. I love it. Did you sing your own songs?
Right.
Mateo did his own stunts.
Right.
So you were saying
I forgot what. Oh yeah, my family would from both sides would not want me to show up and drink. So I would pregame and then I'd just act like it was normal, but it was obvious. Like looking back at it now, it was obvious that I was fucked up. But my behaviors were affecting. Like I would steal from family, and rightfully so. Like it led to like my first felony.
Okay,
and it's like the trajectory for it is like I was just.
Can we talk about that?
But I want to ask you, because I know that while this is happening, you've got some trauma that you probably haven't unloaded. Yeah. And so it's like, it almost seems as though this was the solution at the time. You know, like we talk about the recovery that we have now as a solution, but that, so
can I be
yes, please.
So the first time I started getting in trouble, and I was drinking again at 5, but I wasn't getting any attention, or not. I was getting wrong attention from my dad's side of the family, and that neglect for me, I realized looking back at it now in a lot of therapy, the PTSD that I have still to this day is like, I don't like to talk about certain issues that I'm still trying to work on. But to be specific, I was already stealing by the time I was in first grade, second grade, and I was being molested at the time with CPS, which I was just telling my friend, a fellow, that for me to expose so vulnerably, like in front of a camera, the last time I did something like this, it was twice with CPS investigating like what was happening.
Right.
And so like to have like my family deny it and nothing happened. So I wanted attention. I found it by stealing. So like my principal for many years, she'd like collect pig figurines, Mrs. Jones, at Castro Elementary. She, I think, caught on eventually, but I would take a figurine every time I get suspended, get on the bus, go home, and like hide the paper. And I would try to hide it from my parents that I got suspended. That didn't work. They would find out. And I mean, like my dad would beat me, and like I have scars on my knees from it. Fast forward to just making that a habit. My first felony, like I was happy I got caught, and I invited them being, the police and the detectives, like I invited them to come in because I didn't want to do it anymore. But that, I kept drinking, I kept using, and all I knew I think I only knew how to survive that way. And the only way I could do it to supply like my habit was to be around people who also live that way.
Right.
So,
right. It makes me think about how like because we talked about this when Robbie was on too, about how there is a way, like when a person experiences a lot of trauma, that they will start to kind of like seek things out. And in a lot of ways, like stealing, you can get a rush from stealing, or like engaging in behaviors that are risky can be really fulfilling in that, like they break you away from like the shit that's probably swirling around in people's heads, during that time. So I'm wondering if there was, if you felt like, if you felt like the behaviors, like the stealing, the lying, what you called like the manipulating, like what purpose, if any, did any of that serve for you?
It didn't at that time.
Okay.
There was a moment in time where, because my mom has 11 years in recovery, but she asked me one time, I think 2 years ago or something, she was just like, what, like, do you not have any remorse? And I flat out said, and I was drunk. I was hiding by smoking meth in the bathroom at a hotel across from her. And I was like, no, I absolutely don't, because I felt like I deserved it. You know,
Deserved what?
whatever I wanted, because I didn't get it as a child. Like, that was my entitlement, and I blamed everyone around me. I blamed, the systems. I blamed my family for neglecting me, and I shifted that blame into, well, I'm just going to do whatever I can to just get what I need, since no one else could.
When you look back, would you say that you were experiencing a lot of pain?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, just listening to it, like my heart sinks.
Yeah,
it just sounds very heavy.
Yeah, I will be very specific. So, being a child born to my father's family is very habitual in doing a lot of illegal things and fleeing the country or being deported, post. And so the balance from like having a mother who was underage, me being the first child, and for me to then have to, they were both addicts, alcoholics, and that's their story. But the effect that it had on me from 1 to 4, I was the only child, but I was left around. And then my brother came along, and then my sister came along, and they were gone. And all I had to do was like fend for them. And so for me, like the heaviest thing, and where I'm at today is like, there was only one human that tried to help me, and that was my aunt. And like, she just passed away, and I wish I could tell her like thank you, because she was the one that was like, what's happening? Are you being touched? She like held on, and every time I would see her, she would tell me, like, I'm sorry I let you go to your dad. And I just told her, like, I'm trying my best. Like, you don't have to take that with you. And then at the same token, like, I have a toxic grandmother who, would, every time we talk, she's like, you should appreciate your life because look at where my son is, which is her son that molested me. And I'm like, how do I deal with that? So, I mean, it's a lot that I'm working through in recovery. You were talking about medication. I'm getting on a better medication to like identify like, my borderline personality disorder or like my bipolar symptoms. And a lot of PTSD, because I've never dealt with shit for so long, for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And the only way I knew how to do it was like suppressing it. I would act like I knew what was going on. I act like I knew words like, girl, I didn't even know what acronym meant. I was fake, and I was okay with it. And like, I don't want to be that person. So like where I'm at today is like, I don't know who I was. All I know is like, I know how to like survive and take what was with me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have much.
Yeah.
You're operating without tools.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to take a moment to like just say thank you for bringing that. And I don't want to put like a silver lining on any of this, because I don't know your story 100% or how you experience this, but I know enough to know like what pain looks like, right? And I'm just like really grateful to experience that and like to see that. You use the word today and to talk about like what things look like today. And before we turned on the camera today, you talked about like legal amends you're making right now. So can you tell us a little bit about like what does life look like for you today?
I couldn't imagine a year ago, because I have a little over a year, and over where I was for all my drinking, all my habits, and the people, places, and things is everything opposite of that. But I would dream of like having situations where I was in a community where I was a part of, where I was doing things that were opposite of healthy, but like I was still doing something that was inclusive. So where I'm at today is like, I get to be a part of. I am so vulnerable. And I find a lot of connection with people who like actually care, and it's not transactional. Which is, if I would be lying if I said it's hard to, like, I accept it, but it's so hard to accept because I'm not used to it.
Right.
Like in my head, I still feel like I have like 9 months, because I spent 3 months in rehab. And then 6 months prior to that. But where I'm at today is like I'm honest with my legal amends. Like my sponsor helped me get through the steps, and I've tried many times to be in recovery, but never honestly as I have. I've never been so desperate.
Can you say more about, well, there are two things there.
Yeah.
Can you say more about the legal amends? So
Yeah.
what does that look like for you in recovery right now?
Getting outside help, showing up and finding what options I have available to me, asking questions, being willing to accept whatever is going to happen will happen. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't want to be like my father and run away from my problems. And that was the first thing I told my current sponsor is that for me, if I don't handle that, it's going to take me out because it's been taking me out because I had been avoiding. I hadn't been showing up, or whenever I did, it wasn't earnest, it wasn't honest. And I wanted to be like, this is not what I deserve. But knowing like I have a part in everything that I do, I don't want to go with that baggage anymore just because I know what effects it has, like my just seeing my father and my dad's side of the family. And I don't, if I can do better for myself, I would rather.
I hear that. What you're making me think of is there's a way I think that in 12 step we take responsibility, right? Like when we do a 4th step and we make amends and we do all of that stuff. And I think often, and this is just my opinion, is that there are other things that like influence a person's trajectory, right? And so, and it's going back to like what Lewis was saying earlier, it's like, functioning without tools or functioning without like, like the kind of foundation that can lead to someone's success, right? And I feel like, and listening to you and then thinking about like my own trajectory, I think that we have to, I think that's something that needs to be acknowledged is that, everyone does not start off from the same place. You know what I mean? Like not everyone starts off with the same opportunities. And that one of the gifts of recovery, at least upon reflecting for myself and listening to you, is that, we obviously cannot change the past, but what we get to do is that like with the moment that we're in, which is the only moment we have, right, is to make decisions in this moment. Right. And that I think can be very empowering, right? It's like, of course, like I can't change what's happened to me. But in this moment, I get to talk to you, in this moment, I get to be honest. In this moment, I get to like show myself generosity and maybe peace of mind that I wasn't shown earlier. And I think that can be very difficult, right? Like waking up and realizing like, oh, okay, I'm making a decision to face whatever consequences or whatever things are in front of me.
I'm willing. Like incarceration is definitely in my trajectory. I know that. But knowing that I can be of service and know that I have something more positive once I'm out, because I want to travel. I want to go to meetings out of like all over the world. I don't want to isolate by being in my thoughts of like, what am I doing? Why am I not doing what I need to be doing?
How do you what really got me last week was Robbie talking about how he finished his program and it shifted things like, is going to meetings, what have you. Like, how do you stay motivated? Like, can you talk more about how you stay motivated knowing, and we try not to future trip, but what could potentially happen? Because the easy thing to do would be to kind of throw your hands up and say, whatever. Surrender, but what keeps you from doing that?
Daily. I do it daily. And it's usually right before I go to bed and right when I wake up. I live in an SRO. I have options to be, and I have options to see exactly where I could be if I wasn't in recovery. Where I don't give up is I think about, okay, fuck, I've been here for so long. I've had so many, I don't want to disrespect like my grandmother. I don't want to disrespect what I don't want to leave this world knowing that I didn't try. And my biggest motivation is I pray. I know a lot of my codependency of like my mother, for example. I don't want to disappoint her. I compare a lot of where I was and where I'm at now. And I'm like, okay, I've gotten somewhere. I must have done something right. How can I elevate that and try harder? But it's daily. I'm like, I'm in acceptance of, I'm not homeless anymore. I'm in acceptance of like, I'm doing things the next right thing for myself, which I wouldn't have any of this if I didn't get desperate. Like I'm serious.
How was the drag in that community helping you?
If I didn't have drag, I would 100% not be clean and sober. I
threw that in because it's like we were gonna have Mateo for our drag month, but we realized that we had the potential to really kind of go there.
Yeah. I mean, my first time ever going out of rehab and seeing someone in recovery and seeing someone who was also like me and referencing a show that I used to watch, Chavo de Ocho, was Linda Summers. And for me, I was like, I went back, and you can ask Robbie. I was like, I'm gonna do that. And sure enough, like I have a house that I'm a part of, but people who are also clean and sober. I get to show up in places.
The House of Friday.
Yeah.
Aw.
I used to show up to places that I used to back then abuse and make a fucking fool of myself. And now I get to like do things for my community. I love being of service.
And there's
but
a
it's
pageant
outlet.
coming up, huh?
Yeah. I am running for the Castro Country Club pageant. I'm one of the 4 contestants. Yeah.
Yeah, we're back to 4.
Yeah.
Fighting it out. It's going to be a bloodbath.
I hope it raises the most money so far. That's my intention. Yeah.
Okay, girl. She's already putting in her answers to the questions. I see you.
Hi, I'm
And I would like to say to the esteemed judges.
No, but if I didn't have drag, I wouldn't have an outlet. I've said it before. It's my creative recovery. It's my whatever I can't get through up here or put pen to paper, I can paint it. I can do an art with it, and I get to dance to it. And that's something I've always done since I was a kid. I've always danced.
It's a great place. Like we talked about it a lot. It's like it's a great place to work out your demons.
That 100%.
Yes.
100%.
I wanted to go back to what you were saying about like feeling desperate.
Yeah.
And so there's a way that I think when we hear the word desperate, and it says this in the 12 and 12 and in the big book, like no one wants to admit powerlessness. No one wants to I think no one ever wants to use the word desperate to refer to themselves, right? We'll get to that in a second. Yeah.
I like to use.
Hold on. What did
I like to use thirsty to describe those two. I'm so good.
As Rue would say, you were born to be a drag queen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bonnie Violet.
Bonnie
Violet's incognito on there because she's under a different account.
Yeah. Hi, Bonnie Violet. I don't want to lose my thought. So there is this way. I think there's this other way that we can think about desperation, and it's the way that I think you're thinking about desperation. So you said, I do want to describe myself in this way. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, desperate for me is realizing because I've tried killing myself 5 times. What it was like in the past, and I try not to live in the past, but I do it daily. I have to remind myself daily, like if I go drink, if I go and pick up and use, and even in my SRO, especially around the first of the month, everybody has their money, and at night I'm that person who's like, hey, can you guys like maybe not smoke in the hallway, because I don't want to I'm clean and sober. I've given almost every person in my hallway a book. A green and gold.
I'm sure they love you.
They girl, and I give them food. I'm like, I'm nice, I get it, because I know like sometimes you spend money and you don't. I work with ICMs. I have been in that point where I'm like, I spend all my money on drugs and I'm like, fuck, I'm hungry.
I told you I used to live in your building.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Girl. But it's better than being homeless.
Absolutely.
I probably have hooked up with people in your building. I just felt left out. You live there. You used to live there.
No, desperate for me is it's brought me to, I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution.
Yeah.
What's going to help me? And the person that helped me was my case manager at Episcopal Community Services. And I didn't know he was a fellow, but he, pulled me outside after helping me for 6 months of trying to get into housing while still living on the streets. I was living at Pier 41 for 6 months.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. I go back there and I sit to reflect.
Yeah.
She's fancy. If I'm going to do homeless, I'm going to do homeless the right way.
I'm going to do
you know what my stiff was? I would go there with my suitcase and be like, oh my God, did I miss the ferry? And so anyways.
No, please tell that story.
So then they'd be like, oh yeah, the next. I'm like, oh, when's the next one? I'd be like, oh, it's at 6:30 or 6:45. I'm like, oh, is that okay if I just wait here? And then I did that for 6 months, and then they caught on. And because I'm very nice and I'm very kind when I need something, and that was manipulative, but they were kind enough to let me stay there. the security, but eventually I ended up just having what was on my backpack, on my person, and then my backpack.
I want to stop at the word manipulative for a second, because one of the things so I remember years ago I was at a training site and I had used the word manipulative to describe a patient, and my clinical supervisor stopped me and said, "We don't talk about patients that way." And I go, "Well, why?" And she goes, "Because what you're calling manipulative is the way someone is having their needs met." Right. So I feel like it's interesting that you're talking about like, "Oh, I was being manipulative," when I hear your story, what I'm thinking of is like, no, this person found a way to have their needs met.
Yeah, I was surviving.
Yeah, you
it's
were
like
surviving.
Character assets gone awry, like they say.
Yeah,
basically it was for you at the time. It was unnecessary. It saved you, but now it probably doesn't serve you in the same way, so you can let it go.
And I'm very aware of when it's happening.
Yeah.
My personality will come out sometimes.
I think it's something I did just before I got sober. Really kind of focus. I have to really kind of focusing in on changing the language that I use, because I think sometimes the words that we use can be detrimental. Like if I'm constant, that self-deprecating thing will not, but words can just be so powerful and so kind of damning to us. And so I really like appreciate that.
I mean, one of the things that I've learned over the years or I have experienced or I've learned through experience is that one of the things that I love about addicts and alcoholics is that they're some of the most resourceful, intelligent people I've ever met. And it's because you have to be. It doesn't matter like what someone's background is. Like, people found ways to like have their needs met. You know what I mean? Sometimes it was lying. Sometimes, like, I feel like you would have the maybe not the smoothest running business, but if you got a bunch of like sober addicts and alcoholics, actually, no, I'll take that back. To this day, like the people that I know who like work programs and stuff like that, and like, they've made it a point to live kind of sober lives, they tend to have these like very beautiful lives. And it's because they took all of the skills that they learned while on the street or while like managing their addiction and stuff like that, and they've managed to like make things work for them.
I think it's beautiful. I think that, how we pray to have certain behaviors gone. I heard someone say, they don't leave us in a time that we need we want them to leave or whatever. We are able to tap into them. I think that when you're afraid to tap into something that could possibly save your life, that can be like a challenge. It's like, wow.
No, I mean, when I was desperate to just stay drunk or stay high, I would get myself into situations where I would use my body.
Oh, straight up. Yeah.
And so like now, like I'm so desperate to not go backwards, but find a way of like, how can I put this to use where it's benefiting not just myself, but like someone else?
Yeah.
Your body?
No, just being desperate.
Okay.
I was like,
that was the bonus.
I was like, wait a minute. I just don't want to leave that. No. I think, I love all of this. I think one of the things that's coming up for me with this is that, it just sounds like and I don't know if this is your experience, but it just sounds like you are like realizing or touching on how much potential there is for like the rest of your life. And I'm wondering if you're feeling, or that's your experience.
Yeah, I look forward to waking up and have it like I'm happy. Granted, it's not happy every day, but the decision that I've made to stay clean and sober, the decision that I've made to take responsibility, to take action, I do see I'm going to school for biotechnology. Like I don't believe that, but I'm there. I'm doing drag. I have friends that I see myself in my future. Like I would ask them to be my best man and woman, coming back from my grandmother's funeral, one of the things that I realized is like, she was the stepping stone for me to feel a part of whenever I would come and visit on vacations when I was living with my father. And then not feeling so connected, but granted, that's something that grief, I think, is what I'm processing with that. But I would rather be honest and let you guys know, like, this is like a chosen family for me.
Of course.
Again, a lot of PTSD, but in like reflecting, for so long I wanted to just be a part of, and I didn't have anybody that like understood my experience. And so for me, like San Francisco has given me a lot of people who I consider friends and family. Like I look forward to like seeing faces. And I don't feel like there's any harm coming from it. And I get to see like I had part in that. So I just, for me, like my future, it's family. It's a lot of strength. I get to connect with people and feel like I'm not just in this alone. And like someone had told me at a retreat, they were like, "Girl, get out of your head. Like no one else is thinking about you. They're on it too." And that was helpful. But I also I like taking the feedback that I get from like people who want something better for me. And I've gotten to a place where I'm not resentful of that. I'm like, because I'm super sensitive. But I get to take in it's like I'm just like, what's the best way? Like clay that's being molded. And sometimes I stop and that's my pause. And then, let other hands come in and help me. I don't know. I still feel young at heart.
I really always like to have other hands come and help me.
And on that note, for folks listening in, we have to stop the on-air version, but we'll continue this conversation. And for those familiar with the podcast, you can listen to the next part of our conversation on the podcast